Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Hope City. My name is Peter. I'm the pastor here. I have the privilege of serving here each and every week, and I'm glad that you guys are here today. Glad that you have made the wise choice of showing up to church on daylight savings time. I think you parents, if you're parents in the room, you've got to figure it out, right? Like, I'm going to bring my kids to a place where they're going to take care of them for an hour and 15 minutes on daylight savings time, and they're all of their crankiness. Yes, they're like, we'll do that. That is amazing. And they're going to feed them and take care of them and all that stuff. Done, right? So tell your friends next time around, if there is a next time around. We're trying to figure that out here in Florida. But, this is a great place to be, and we're thrilled that you have chosen to be with us this morning. But I love this last question, that it asks the question of, what if you could break through these walls? See, we're in the midst of a series right now that we're taking a look at what are the things that separate us from experiencing God, from knowing God in His fullness. Like, there are things like our shame and our guilt and our past, maybe even our past regrets that keep us from living a life that God has intended for us to live, of living this kind of fully free life. In fact, our key verse for this whole series is from John chapter 8, verse 36. I want you to take a look. It says that if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. See, we're talking about freedom throughout this entire series, but not just like casual freedom. We're talking about the sense of being free from everything. Like there is nothing that is holding you back, nothing that is keeping you from experiencing all that God has for you. If you missed last week, there was a great message that I would love for you to hear. You can check that out on our podcast or YouTube. There's a sense that we often feel like we need to get ourselves all right. Last week I told you about my couch, and this is a couch that I've had for many years now. This was our house in New Jersey. Like this was the whole house in New Jersey because it was that small. But this was our couch, and our kids, they were babies on that couch. They grew up, and so one of those days we took the cushions off of the couch. That's a big mistake. We revealed all of the nasty mess inside. How many, after hearing that last week, went home and checked the cushions on your couch? Did anybody do that? Okay. One honest person. And so I'm going to recommend that you go home and do that today. Because it's nasty what you find under there. Like, that's gross. You've been sitting on that. Vacuum it out, okay? Like, figure that thing out. But sometimes we find a gigantic mess in our life somewhere. See, with this couch, you got to know that, like, if something spills on it, or if there's, like, popcorn or whatever on it, we're going to clean it up if we see it on the surface. Either that or my dog's going to get it. One way or the other, it's gonna disappear. But the problem is when it starts to find its way and navigate its way into the cracks and the crevices of our couch, is when we can't or we won't address it. But sometimes our lives are just like that. There are things that are hiding. And other times it's right on the surface. See, many years ago, I used to drive a Ford Taurus station wagon. Like if you wanted to figure out how to make a Ford Taurus even cooler as a young, 20-something, this was my rig. Actually, this isn't my rig because that car was so ugly, I refused to take a picture of it. I couldn't find a picture to show you of my own car. I had to borrow this one from the internet. And so this isn't one of those cars that you lean on it and take a selfie and you're like, oh man, look at me, look how cool I am. But this car had a check engine light on it pretty regularly. It was like that small, tiny little bulb that cost a fortune. Anybody understand what I'm talking about? Like where that bulb means that your life savings is now gone. But so imagine if I took this Taurus to the mechanic and I said, hey, listen, I don't know what's wrong. Like my check engine light's going off. And the mechanic then pops the hood to find this. Imagine, right? Imagine if that was the case. What do you think he'd say? The mechanic inevitably would be like, well, that there right there is your problem. That's a 14-foot king snake or whatever, rock python, right? And it's coiled up around your coil. That's got to go. I don't know why he talks like that, but I just have a feeling like whoever I bring this to is going to respond in such a manner. But this actually is a true story. There's a couple in Africa that their car, it stopped working. Like all of a sudden it stopped working. They're like, what gives? And so the husband comes around to the front, pops the hood, and there he sees this 14-foot rock python coiled up around their engine block. I'm not dealing with that. Like, what mechanic do you find that's like, yeah, sure, I can get that out, no problem. I mean, it doesn't work like that. See, some issues are right on the surface. You look in it and you go, yeah, you're not supposed to have snakes in your car. On a plane, yes, but not in your car. So we'll figure that out. But then we've got some teachers in the room. We're grateful for you. In fact, we can't wait to send our kids back to you tomorrow. But we're grateful for you guys. But listen, in some counties in Florida, they're struggling with literacy, where they're trying to read. Not in our county, because you guys do an awesome job. But sometimes we just need to figure out, like, why is this happening? See, look at this sign. Like, this might be a hint. This next picture here, Wes, may be a hint as to why we're struggling with reading. You can't spell, right? Like, that's right on the surface. It's right there. You don't have to dig very deep to figure out what the issue is. See, sometimes problems are easy to discover, and other times it's wedged deep inside the couch. This morning we want to do exactly that. We want to discover what's going on in our lives. We're going to push past our fears. We're going to kind of pop the hood and discover what's underneath. We're going to get past our frustration, past our shame, past our embarrassment, the fear of looking stupid, in order to confront the areas of our own life, my own life, that God wants to fix. See, here's what I know to be true. There's a great quote by Frederick Buechner. And Frederick Buechner, he says it this way. He says, "Here's the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid." Here's the world. Good things and bad things are going to happen, but don't fear. Don't be afraid. See, this past week, I recognized within the course of a single day that sadness and joy met hand in hand. See, I sat across the table from two different people within the span of about 4 hours. The first person, we were talking about their business and how great things were going, how things were headed in the right direction, and hard work was paying off, and it was filled with excitement, filled with joy. And not but 2-3 hours later, I was sitting across the table with a cup of coffee in my hand, listening to a friend tell me that they're experiencing a debilitating disease that likely they will never recover from for the rest of their life. Joy and grief, pain and sorrow. See, there are good parts in life, but there are bad parts too. There are good parts like parties, being debt-free, going to weddings, like experiencing the sweetness of newborn babies. But then there's difficult parts too, where it's battling with loneliness or kids who need chemo again, that affair or the divorce, our silent suffering and our unseen addictions. These are the types of things. These are the walls that we want to start taking down. We want to start tackling these things because it's the dings and the dents. It's the disappointments and the devastations of life that I believe Jesus is most interested in. Like, what do we do with those things? I think that's where Jesus kind of really leans in and says, oh, we can do something about that. See, Jesus is the one who has been defined as a healer. In fact, the Bible calls him the great physician. And yet Jesus doesn't just do like what a school nurse does when she's like, oh yeah, we can put a Band-Aid on that. Like we can just kind of cover it. No, Jesus says we can heal that. We can cause that to be supernaturally taken care of. And healing is what some of us need, if we're honest right now. Like some of us, we just need to be healed. See, here at Hope City, I want you to know that this is not probably your typical church. See, in our church, it's okay not to be okay. Like when you show up on a Sunday morning, maybe this is a new thought to some of you, depending on your background. Many people think that when you come to church, church is the one place that you need to have it all together. Like if you're going to show up anywhere in your week, this is the place where you're gonna kind of dress up, you're going to be polished. You better have your junk together. Otherwise, sweep it under the couch so nobody sees it, right? Many of us believe that we need to cover up our scars. We need to sanitize the scandals in our life or gloss over grief. But if we're honest, I think that you and I, we build walls. Those are the 2x4s. Those are the things that we build walls with. We build these things that prevent us from experiencing God and other people in a meaningful way. We're frightened that the messy parts of our lives will be exposed, and then someone pours on the guilt and shame. And so we've got our walls that we put up all around us. But let me ask you this quick question up front. What are the walls in your life? What do these studs represent to you? What are you framing up around you? See, maybe it's something that, as I've said, causes you shame, or something that you're scared to death that other people will find out about. Some of you worry that you were screaming at your kids in the parking lot on the way in, or that others would be shocked if they knew your sexual history, or discover that maybe you take Prozac for depression. See, some of you hold on tight to the secret that you wear Spanx underneath your clothes to suck in, that stomach. And I'm really only talking about the men in this room. But we're scared to death that somebody's going to find out our secrets and how messy our life is. And that the church, if you showed up, they're going to go, oh, no, I'm shocked. Like, how could this happen, right? See, we all bury our hurts, we all bury our pain underneath of the couch cushions, and we pretend to be okay when we're not okay. But as Christ followers, it's supposed to be just the opposite because we're so confident in God's grace, his radical love for mess-ups, for screw-ups, just like me. See, we realize it's okay not to be okay. That's how grace works. Before Jesus can heal us, we have to break through these walls. We've got to move beyond the facade of having our life all together all the time. But here's what I want you to hear me say. As the lead pastor of this church, first off, it's okay not to be okay. But I care about you all way too much. See, it's not okay to stay that way. Because as we said in the very beginning, that if the Son has set you free, you're free indeed. You don't need to live in pain. You don't need to live in hiding or heartache. See, God loves you way too much to leave you stuck there. See, remember that Jesus' love for you is unconditional. In other words, it doesn't depend on you, your effort, or your performance. Grace is given. And he says, come on. Let's discover what's holding your walls up. Let's discover what you've begun to frame up in your life. In fact, I think if we could be honest, if we were sitting right here in the room with Jesus, I think he'd say, you know what? I know that you're feeling like you're failing as a parent. Or I know that you had a panic attack and you feel ashamed that if anyone were to find out about that. Or I know that you feel lonely and jealous of your friends that are getting married, and even though you pretend to be happy for them, I know. Or I know that you've tried to break that addiction and so many times that you're scared that it's just going to pull you right back in. It's going to suck you back in. And with compassion in his eyes, I think that Jesus would look straight back to yours and say, my child, you are loved more than you know. And everything is going to be okay. Trust me. See, that's why God sent his son Jesus for you and for me. He really wants to help. See, this is your invitation this morning, just to be honest with yourself. You don't have to be honest with me. You don't have to kind of say anything. I'm not going to ask you to say anything out loud. But what I am asking is, would you, in the next 20 minutes, would we just be honest with one another? And see what's kind of lurking under the hood in our life. Whatever's broken, Jesus can help. Well, he can heal it, in fact. But we first must discover the place where you need his healing touch most. And in order to do that, I want to invite you guys. There's Bibles all in your chairs around you, or you can click over on your smartphone. Turn to John chapter 9, which is on page 731. In fact, James, if you could turn some of the house lights up a little bit, that would be great. See, here's what we know. In John chapter 9, page 731, we can follow along on the screen as well. It says this: as Jesus went along, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And so his disciples and Jesus, they were walking along the way, and he was blind from birth, and they asked him a question. His disciples said to him, hey, Rabbi, or teacher, who sinned, this man or his parents, because he was born blind? See, in that day and age, if somebody was born blind or they were born with some debilitating disease, it was very often looked upon as if it was a consequence from God. And so they said, well, we just want to know, who's at fault for this, Jesus? Like, why was this guy born blind? Why was he being punished? And so he says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Jesus goes on and he says, so long as it's day, we must do the works of him who sent me. See, night is coming when no one can work. See, while I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. And after saying this, he spit on the ground, he made some mud with saliva, and he put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam, where this word means sent. So the man went and washed, and he came away seeing. Right? This is an incredible thing. This morning I want to take a few minutes just to unpack how Jesus heals this man who had a severe limitation. You can't even say this guy had a few blind spots. He was born blind. He was totally, utterly in the dark. Some of us identify with him, not because you're physically blind, but because there are places in your world that feel disconnected. There are places in your world where it feels as if you are a bit in the dark. See, there are ways in your life, or there's things in your life that we can't necessarily see about ourselves, like unhealthy habits or patterns of ways of dealing that are a bit dysfunctional. And maybe we're not operating the way that God intended. See, some of us, from birth, we've been just like this guy. From birth, we've been raised in such a way that we think anger and addiction are normal in the home, and we didn't know that there's any other way to live. But Jesus says this. He says, I want to turn the lights on in your life today so you can discover those places in your world that only He can heal. And this morning, I want to share with you 3 things that I think Jesus can do in your life if you'll let Him. 3 things that apply from the way that this man was healed. And so if you're taking notes, the first thing this morning is that healing begins when we ask the right questions. Healing begins when we ask the right questions. See, notice in verse 2 that Jesus' disciples, they start out by asking the wrong question. There's just a wrong way of doing this. These guys are focused on the wrong thing. In verse 2, it says this. His disciples come to him and they said, hey, Rabbi, who sinned? Like, this is their question. We want to know, whose fault is it? Who's to blame for this issue? Is it the guy? Is it his parents? Like, what's the deal, Jesus? And I think that this is most often where we find ourselves. Because we say things like, hey, God, where are you? Why did this happen? Or God, who's to blame? Is it nature or nurture? Is it his parents, or is it just the way that he is? Or, what happened? See, this is the wrong question. The wrong question to start with is by saying, who's to blame, Jesus? And yet I think there's a better question to ask. When pain sneaks into your life, a better question that you can ask, or maybe even the best question you can ask, is, God, what are you about to do? What's God about to do in your life when something sneaks in and it robs your joy? When something sneaks in and it's choking out, the pleasure and your desires in your own life. God, what are you about to do with this? God, where are you in the midst of this? Because we know this to be true, that God is a good God, and He's promised to work things together for all who love Him. And God, what are you doing here? That's an honest question to ask. That's a great place to start. See, in fact, other translations, they go on and they say that the power of God may be displayed in this man's life. That's why this happened. In verse 3, it says, this happened so the works of God, or the power of God, would be put on display, could be put, so that others would see it. In other words, what's the ultimate plan for this man's pain? Is so that God might reveal His glory. Now, this may be a new thought to some of you, but what if I told you that place in your own life, that place that you are the most embarrassed of, you know what it is. In fact, you don't want to share it with anyone else. That place you feel most insecure, or that place that causes you the most pain, or you feel the weakest. What if in that place, what if I told you that was the place where God could display His greatest strength? Or that God could be put on display for all to see, and He was the greatest glory. Maybe that's the thing that you wish never happened. That was your divorce. Or could God really use it for His glory? Yes. Or the depression. Could God really work through depression? Yes. The addiction. Yes. God can use all of that, our pain, our heartache, for His glory. See, with man, divorce, depression, addiction, all of that stuff seems absolutely impossible. Like we're staring down the barrel of these patterns in our life, and we look at it and we say, how could this possibly change? And the reality is that whatever you think God is capable of, He can do way more than that. In fact, one of the greatest things that I ever learned, this was way back in college, Bible college, a professor kind of defined God, and we were like, how do we define God? I'll never forget it. God is that which your mind cannot think of anything greater than. So the greatest thing that you can imagine, God is bigger than that. God is even greater than that. Even more powerful than that, more significant than that. He is more than whatever it is that your mind is potentially capable of imagining. And so What is that in your life? All things are possible through God, through Jesus. See, Jesus specializes in turnarounds. He specializes in turning your weakness, my weakness, into strengths that put God's power on display for everybody to see. But you and I, we have to ask the right questions. We've got to start from the right place. We can waste time by asking questions like, whose fault is this? Or, Jesus, where are you? Or, God, what's going on? But ask the right question of, God, what are you doing in my life? What's Jesus up to? See, if we're going to find freedom, if we're going to discover that freedom, we need to kind of start facing some of these pillars, some of these studs that are holding up the walls around us. Maybe ask some of these questions. You might want to write one or two of these down to think about later this week. Like, what are my weaknesses? What are those places that I feel the weakest? Who am I really? Maybe some of you, fear has gripped your life, and you say, what are the nagging fears that I face? What are those things that I'm afraid of? Or how about, how honest am I? How open to change am I? See, healing begins when you ask the right questions. Think of this as like a soul scavenger hunt. Head out from church today, go home, and do a little scavenger hunt in your own soul, in the quietness of your own space. Be honest with yourself. But John 9 doesn't stop there. It doesn't allow us to just stop and say, yeah, okay, so we ask the right questions and everything falls in line. John 9 tells us that not only should we ask the right questions, but we also have to let Jesus open your eyes. We have to let Jesus open your eyes. See, remember, in John chapter 9, this man was born blind. He had never seen before. But all of us, we are blind in some way or another because of our own human frailty and our limited perspective. We miss out on things in some ways. We don't know the full truth. For example, many of you guys have gym bags, right? I have a church bag. It's an orange book bag that I get here at every Sunday morning, 6:30, not looking like this. And somewhere along the way, I'll get changed, and so I'll put new deodorant on and all this kind of stuff. And so my church bag, I take the deodorant, throw it in every Saturday night, and then head off to church the next day. Well, this past week, I was at Starbucks doing a little bit of work, there for about 4 hours. And when I got there was a whole lot of people in the room. And you know there's a whole lot of people in the room because you can kind of smell that there's a lot of people in the room. Like, you know what I'm talking about? You're like, wow, there's a ton of people in here. And there's one of them that is really ripe. And so I thought to myself, all right, I can deal with this. So I sat down at my table. It's my table, by the way, at Starbucks. And several other people were kind of around me. I thought, this is my luck. Like, this is my luck that person is right near me. Like, I can't deal with this. I can't smell this all day long. And so I kind of did one of these casual things after a little bit, picked up my stuff, and went to the other table. And wouldn't you know it, it's like, it stinks over there too. I was like, come on, this is ridiculous. Until all of a sudden I just did kind of one of these to like wipe my nose or whatever. And I was like, it's me, right? Like you did one of those, oh yes, I didn't put any deodorant on because it's in the church bag. Like, it's not where it belongs. And so my habits, my patterns were out of whack. And I missed it. Like, I totally missed it. I woke up, went through my day, and it wasn't for 3, 4, maybe 5 hours later where I was like, oh, that's you. You're offending the world. I got it. Right, perfect. And that's the way that many of us kind of go through life. We go through life thinking that everybody else is at fault, or everybody else is to blame, or that's really the offensive guy. When sometimes we just kind of need to do a little pit check real quick and be like, is it me? Or maybe what in my life stinks right now? That may be a better question. And see, the question or the reality is that some of us, we need to have our eyes opened. We need Jesus to open our eyes, because in this day and age, Jesus was talking to two totally different groups of people. He was constantly talking to a group of people that many of us are very familiar with, and that's the super religious people. The people who have a whole layer of spiritual blindness. Because why? Because they suffer from religious pride. Maybe some of you in this room, you have no tolerance or patience for those who don't have it all together. And so then you're the person that kind of judges your eyes, or judges others, you roll your eyes, and you're basically the ultimate Pharisee, the ultimate one, and you just kind of power through it. You never really look deep inside yourself, and you don't realize that other people see you as an unsafe person. That they're afraid that if they were to come to you, that you'd be like, you need to get out of here. You stink way too much. You can't be in my presence. Or maybe some of you have a cynical spirit. Raise your hand if you have the gift of sarcasm. I'm just kidding. Don't do it. But those are my people, right? Like, I hear you. Like, I have that gift. And there are times when my cynical spirit or my sarcasm has a way of slicing and dicing and cutting my way through life. And it's sometimes funny, but very often it can be hurtful, and it goes beyond that. See, if we're always sarcastic, always poking fun, always cutting others down, mocking them, telling them how they could have done it better or how you are better, and you don't see it, well, that's a big deal. See, cynicism is like pouring battery acid on relationships around you. People will just push you away. They will distance yourself. Maybe that's your kids, your marriage, your friends. See, it's blind spots like this, by definition, that you don't see. And honestly, that kind of blindness impacts those who we love most. So this morning, we need to invite Jesus to shine his light into our life. See, verse 4, it says, as long as it's day, as long as the light is out there, we must do the works of him who sent me, because night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And the light of the world is going to illuminate God's character. It's going to show his plumb line, that thing that reveals how straight the walls are, how straight things are. And his plumb line is out there, and it's the light of life. See, this is the key part about breaking through the walls that are holding us back, is we have to let Jesus open our eyes, shine the light of his truth into the dark, shadowy places of our life. Like I said, that sarcastic, cynical side of my own life, believe it or not, there was a day when it was way worse than it is even now. And along the way that I had to recognize that the patterns of my speech actually reflected the overflow of my heart, Scripture says. And I needed Christ to shine his light in my heart to reveal the darkness in my own world. And so my question is, what does Jesus need to reveal in you? What place is the Holy Spirit kind of opening and illuminating in the depth and the darkness of your own heart? See, to discover what God really wants us to teach us, we need to have our eyes open. But see, some of you are saying right now, and I get it, I know some of you are saying this is just hitting a little too close to home, getting a little too personal. You said depression, you said Prozac, you said divorce, addiction. Can't we just keep this a little bit more like G-rated? It's easy to go to church and just check the box and go home. Listen, I don't want you to check out on me yet, because you have to understand the third and final thing, is that before you get better, it may get messier. Okay? Don't think for a second that you show up to church one time and that all of the problems of your world go away. Before you get better, before you move into a place of healing, it may just get messier. And so for some of you who are sort of on the edge of the church thing, and you said, I'm going to give it a few weeks, and then you leave here today and you're like, well, I don't feel any better today. It may be because we are stuck, we're trapped in point 3 here where it might just get messier. Why? Because what did Jesus do? Jesus, he looks at this guy, and what happens next is Jesus goes like this. In verse 6, he says, after saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and then put it in the dude's eyes. Cool, right? Like, nobody wants that. I've never once been to the eye doctor, and he's been like, well, just a second. And then spits it on the ground and then rolls it up and then puts it in my eye. I'd be like, what are you doing? What is wrong with you, man? Where are you credentialed from? Walmart? Get out of here. No way, right? But this is exactly what Jesus does. He leans in. He actually kneels down. I think he probably got kind of close to the dirt. And then he makes this paste out of his own spit and puts it in one of the most tender places in a person's body, his eye. Even the last time somebody poked you in the eye, didn't you just want to punch him in the throat? You're like, how dare you? That hurt. It's the most frustrating thing when somebody pokes your eye, let alone jams mud in it. But that was the process by which this guy got better. I'm sorry my mic is all over the place today. We're working on it. The process by which this guy got better was that he went through a messy situation. And sometimes, before you get better, it just gets messier. See, how many of you have ever been to counseling? You go in the first counseling session, you sit down and you unpack like 35 years of baggage, and then the person looks at you and says, and then you give them maybe like 5 minutes to tell them what they think, and you walk out of there thinking, oh, this is going to be it. I'm going to be healed. $100 and off I go. It doesn't work like that. If you've ever been to counseling, you know that it is repetition. It's actually going and beginning to unpack what's going on in your world, beginning to pull things out that you didn't even know was there. And it's painful. I went to counseling for months. And I'm telling you, I walked out of there so many days where I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this to myself? It's so much easier to just sit and kind of quietly stuff it. I'm great at stuffing emotions. I can do that. But dealing with it, it got messy, right? See, if you'll let him, I believe that Jesus will turn your test into a testimony. See, here's why. Here's what I want you to see this. In verse 7, Jesus looks at the guy, and he says, hey, go to the pool of Siloam, which means sent. And the man went, and he washed, and he came home seeing. The guy just comes back. He can see again. Imagine that moment. He spent his whole life in the dark. He spent his whole life, blind, and boom, the lights get turned on. Sunlight pours in. He begins to see what everybody else has only described to him. And Jesus turns his mess into a miracle. And at first, nobody even believes him. Look at verse 8 through 11. It goes on and says, his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, wait a second, isn't that the same guy who used to sit and beg? And some claimed that he was, and others said, no, he only looks like him. But he himself, this guy, the blind guy who can now see, says, I'm the man. He probably felt like the man, right? Like, I am that man. And he says, well, how then were your eyes open? They asked. He replied, the man that they called Jesus, listen to this, made some mud out of spit. And then he put it in my eyes. And everybody in the world is like, what? What kind of like witch doctor is this, right? Like, and he told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. All this guy can do is talk about who the person of Jesus is because of what he went through. If he wasn't blind, he would never have been able to tell his entire world, his network of friends, I can see. It was Jesus. It was the Son of God who healed me. See, I believe that Jesus can turn your test into a testimony, whatever it may be that you're walking through, that you were once blind and now you can see. In fact, I have the privilege of sitting across the table from so many of you. And you tell me things like that most people wouldn't even believe, that you've been healed from, you've been able to forgive, you've been able to overcome. And this is the hand of God working in your life. The very thing that's kept you in the dark for years, ashamed, embarrassed, guilty, defeated. Christ can turn that into a strength. He can turn your weakness into his strength. Whenever God shines his light into your life, listen to me, he puts his glory on display for all to see. That's the whole reason why my God wants to heal us. Because Jesus healed this blind man for one reason alone. Remember, in verse 3, it said, this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. In other words, this man, he was allowed to suffer so that God's goodness, his glory, and his grace could be displayed. And this morning, I'm telling you, he will do the same thing for you if you come to him with honesty and trust. Honesty and trust. So my prayer for you this morning is this. I've been praying this all week. May God open your eyes this week. That may the light of Christ, as we've been talking about the walls that we've put up in our life, may the light of Christ just flood your world even today, even in these moments. That this is not as good as it gets. May you discover that your past doesn't have to impact your present any longer. And it's possible to actually break through the walls that hold you back, the walls that maybe you've even built in your life. See, God's greatest desire is to turn that thing that you've always looked at as a test into a testimony of God's grace and his goodness. See, time doesn't heal all wounds, does it? Only God heals those things. And when we invite God into our life to heal those, when we say, God, I don't even know if I fully understand all of the pain that I'm in. The reality is that he is right there. He's the great physician, ready to heal, ready and willing. So would you today, as I've been speaking, there has been something, I'm willing to bet, there's been something that's just kind of rolling through your head. Would you be willing to invite Christ to heal that? Would you invite Christ into the broken areas of your life that need his touch today? You know, Matt and the band, they're going to come out and they're going to lead us in one final song. And I want to encourage you as a way of responding to today's message. Would you specifically ask the Lord to heal that area? To invite his healing into that place in your life? And to discover that God will do what only God can do when your eyes are open